now have a dedicated space they can use to produce the sweets, and will be sold at markets or used to fill many orders they have received thus far. The Haddads did have some help getting their business up and running. Volunteers helped Mr. Haddad find some equipment that needed to begin, assisted in construction of the new shed-turned-chocolate factory, and in turn the Haddads donated a month of profits from their home-based business to the Fort McMurray Wildfire Relief Fund to show their appreciation for the new home and country. This sense of community and recognition the Prime Minister recently referenced and commissioned the Haddads in an address to the United Nations Leaders Summit on Refugees. Mr. Speaker, I ask colleagues in the House Assembly to join me in congratulating the Haddad family opening of Peace by Chocolate and their continued success in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you for those member statements. I'll take a couple of seconds just to remind all members to please try and time your statements to just shy of 1 minute so that we meet our deadline. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, ever since the 96% strike vote by teachers, the Premier has been saying that he wants to avoid a strike and work with them on improving classroom conditions. Yesterday, teachers indicated that they are prepared to form a conciliation board to work out the impasse between his government and teachers, Mr. Speaker. A conciliation board would be the table where this can be worked out without a strike. So I'd like to ask the Premier, will his government say yes to a conciliation board with teachers?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Yesterday, he's right, the Teachers Union did reach out. The Minister has responded to them today. When we're certain that they've received that response, we'll be happy to table it in the House.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, parents and students also would like to know whether the government is prepared to go to a conciliation board. I don't know how the government sent their response, whether it was by carrier pigeon or by bicycle courier, but we're pretty sure, Mr. Speaker, that in 2016 the union has the government's response. Parents got letters yesterday telling them to make contingency plans in the case of a strike. Why not share with parents and all Nova Scotians now whether the government is saying yes?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, one more time for the Leader of the Conservative Party to stand up and grandstand in the House, Mr. Speaker. It's only appropriate that our response goes to the NSTU. Once we're sure they'll have it, we'd be happy to share it.
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Certain that they have it, Mr. Speaker. We'll be happy to share it with the Honourable Member and all members in the House, Mr. Speaker, the media, and all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier seems to think the only two groups that are interested in whether there will be a conciliation board are his government and the teachers' union. What he's missing, Mr. Speaker, is that parents and students are also at this table whether he likes it or not. Their school year is what's in question here, Mr. Speaker. The learning conditions in the classroom is what is in dispute here, Mr. Speaker. They deserve to know as much as anybody what his government's answer is. So I'd like to ask the Premier, he knows the teachers union already has their response. Why won't he share with parents and students now what obviously they have told the teachers union?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I am not certain that the teachers union has that response. I told the honourable member as soon as they do, we'd be happy to share it with those and all members of the province. I think it's only reasonable, Mr. Speaker, the people who asked you the question should know the answer before you stand in front of the camera. But that is not something that honourable member or that caucus practices. We believe in relationships, Mr. Speaker. It's important that we tell them first, Mr. Speaker, and not find the first camera to get into grandstand.
The Honourable Leader in the House for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Premier. Yesterday, we were told by a high-ranking official in the Health Authority that every community cannot expect a family doctor. Mr. Speaker, the people of Weymouth had learnt this the hard way. Now Nova Scotians around the province are wondering if the government will also deny new billing numbers to their communities if they need a doctor. So I asked the Premier, when will he tell Nova Scotians which community can and cannot expect a new doctor?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank the gentleman for the question. I'm very proud of the work that communities are doing across the province, working with the new District Health Authority and the Minister to make sure that they have the health care complement in their community that they require. Mr. Speaker, we know there are some challenges associated with that. We've been working together to make sure that that collaborative teams are set up in communities across this province.
The Honourable Leader in the House for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, the Health Authority is telling Nova Scotians that the transition to collaborative care could take another 10 years. Yet this government seems to have no short-term plan for this transition. In fact, this government's decision to withhold billing numbers is only adding to the problem of a doctor shortage across our province. If this continues, there will be a province-wide crisis long before the 10 years transition is completed. Mr. Speaker, a health authority official has admitted that in Weymouth a crisis is already arrived. So I ask the Premier, when will this government provide a short-term plan to address the growing number of Nova Scotians who cannot find a family doctor?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. We know there's a doctor there visiting in the clinic along with a nurse practitioner now in Weymouth, Mr. Speaker. We're continuing to work with communities across the province. I want to thank the honourable member from Clare Digby who continues to work with this community to help find solutions. Mr. Speaker, there are positive signs on the horizon for that community. As we look across the province, we're seeing the beginnings of beginning to see positive signs, but there's no question there's challenges in certain communities, and we're reaching out and working with those communities to make sure that we have a good handle on the physician resource requirements, not only this year and next year, but into the future, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue to work to make sure that that collaborative practice approach is what physicians are looking for, will be in place in communities across our province.
The Honourable Leader in the House for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, this government continues to say that they are listening to doctors to justify decisions such as withholding billing numbers for new doctors. Well, Mr. Speaker, the President of Doctors Nova Scotia recently spoke out in the media saying that doctors, and I quote, have not been engaged by either the government or the Nova Scotia Health Authority to help shape the collaborative teams, end of quote. Mr. Speaker, she goes on to point out the obvious needs to be a short-term solution to the ongoing doctor shortage, and I will table that. So I ask the Premier, if this government is saying they are listening to doctors, why is the President of Doctors Nova Scotia saying otherwise?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I want to thank Doctors Nova Scotia, physicians across the provinces, healthcare providers, Mr. Speaker, who are working with our government to ensure that we continue to build on collaborative practice, making sure that they are in communities across this province, because it's what, Mr. Speaker, healthcare providers are telling us is the environment they want to work in.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Highcrest Nursing Home, Mr. Speaker, is across the street from All Saints Hospital in Spring Hill, as I believe the Minister knows. Doctors at the hospital are no longer allowed to cross the street to Highcrest to do visitations to the senior residents there, Mr. Speaker. The reason is there are only 2 emergency room doctors left, and they are too busy, and so they've been ordered not to cross the street anymore to provide medical assistance to the residents of Highcrest. Mr. Speaker, that means those residents have to either go out, often in the cold, at some risk, or even, in extreme cases, take an ambulance across the street. I'd like to ask the Minister, will he intervene with the Health Authority on behalf of the residents of Highcrest Nursing Home and order the hospital to allow their doctors to cross the street to help the residents of Highcrest Nursing Home?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I can convey to the honourable member, as I said to him yesterday, I would look into the current situation at Spring Hill. I met with Dr. Lynn Harrigan last evening to work on I guess some kind of a short-term plan to meet the current challenges that Spring Hill is experiencing. Part of it is due to a particular practitioner there and family circumstances. There are many issues that are involved in Spring Hill.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to tell the Minister I appreciate that answer. It's very helpful, and I'm thankful for it. In the meantime, of course, the situation goes on that doctors, the few remaining doctors, are not allowed to cross the street. I hope the Minister will provide some short-term solution for that as well. I'd just like to ask the Minister, what does he advise the residents and staff of Highcrest when they have residents needing medical care in the meantime?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, it depends on the level of care that is required by a resident. We would find that there would be nursing available in our nursing homes that can look after many of the needs of patients. If it's something more critical, then that's when they would be transported to a facility. Many of our nursing homes don't have a doctor readily available, and EHS, in fact, is able to intervene and provide the necessary emergency care and stabilization of patients in our nursing homes.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are many challenges facing teachers in today's classrooms. The diverse needs of students in each classroom is one such challenge. A single teacher is expected to plan their lessons so that students meet defined learning outcomes, include adaptations to enable students to meet those outcomes, and deliver individual program plans for students who are unable to meet the outcomes. Now, Mr. Speaker, the number of students on IPPs has gone up, and teachers are telling me that rather than improving their workload, the Minister's action plan has actually made their jobs more daunting than ever. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister is, would she please admit that her action plan simply isn't working and agree to stop making changes until teachers have been meaningfully consulted?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I've said in this House, and I've said throughout my whole career, that the teachers in the classroom are the people who make the difference. I stand by that statement. And we have opened our doors and opened our ears to listen to what their concerns are. We have established a partnership a team to hear those concerns. I'm going into classrooms, I'm meeting with teachers, because I do understand that there are complexities, and it's our responsibility to listen and to ask them to help us with their solutions.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Well, once again, Mr. Speaker, I did not hear an actual response to my question in her answer, but many teachers feel that the action plan deserves to be taken right off the table entirely. They are telling me that they're sharing many of their personal experiences, and one teacher actually said that in a class of 17, 6 students were on IPPs, and while the students not on IPPs were writing provincial assessments, other students needed to be engaged in some kind of productive activities, but no teaching support was allotted. However, when the minister's IPP review was conducted over the past year, most of these recommendations focused on increased data collection and revised training materials for teachers. So, Mr. Speaker, teachers feel like they are drowning in data. They need, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister is, will the Minister agree to bargain with the union fairly and make the changes actually needed so that teachers get back to teaching instead of being data collectors?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we did a review of students that were on IPPs, there was an alarming increase. And with the declining enrollment and an increase in the number of students on IPP, it was absolutely critical that we look at why that was happening, how we could help parents and students, and how we could help teachers to ensure that the students and the teachers were coming together with a program that was meeting the students' needs. And, Mr. Speaker, we don't need a bargaining table to do that.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. The Minister is dragging his feet on tightening up spending rules for municipalities because he says he doesn't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to one situation. However, he knows there is at least one other situation in this province where taxpayers allegedly paid for alcohol, travel, and extravagant meals. The minister must know, as we all do, the Ombudsman is investigating the expenses in the municipality of Guysborough County. So when will the minister stand with the taxpayers of this province and get serious about protecting their money?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the member's comments. And of course, the Ombudsman's office is an independent office of government who is responsible for conducting these investigations independently of the executive branch of government. But I do reject the member's premise that we are not active on this file, Mr. Speaker. We, of course, want all of our municipalities to have a standardized level of transparency and accountability. In fact, I sent a letter out this morning to President Clark of the UNSM, as well as Mary Walsh, the President of the AMA, and asking the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities and the Association of Municipal Administrators to join the Department of Municipal Affairs to work on a standardized expense policy for all municipalities, including requiring municipal expenses to be posted online. I'll table that for the members' view.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's great news. It sounds very positive, and maybe perhaps my bills will be considered for passing. You know, the minister's taken credit for triggering the forensic audit after numerous of red flags, months, years. The Ombudsman is also investigating Guysborough County, and we now know that past and present councillors allegedly spent thousands of dollars worth of booze and travel. Has the minister triggered a forensic audit in Guysborough County since he was so eager to take the credit for the one in Richmond County?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just to be clear, not taking credit for the forensic audit in Richmond County. Let's be clear. Let's be clear. There was a decision made by council, and our staff made a recommendation to do that and supported the move forward. That's what I said in this House. The record is clear on that, Mr. Speaker. And obviously, it's a priority of this government to ensure that municipalities have the same standardized level of transparency and accountability with their expenses as us MLAs do, Mr. Speaker. So I'm hoping that the member will work with our party in moving forward on this very important initiative that the Department of Municipal Affairs has been doing for actually a very long time now.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I guess you could say we're trying to work with the government here in this chamber to resolve this matter. Mr. Speaker, question for the Minister of Municipal Affairs. Money from the taxpayers of Richmond County is essentially now in the hands of the Liberal Party, courtesy of a Liberal Party fundraiser for the member for Richmond. The Premier, the Minister, and the member for Richmond feel there is no obligation for the Liberal Party to return the money to the Richmond taxpayers. Mr. Speaker and Mr. Minister, should we expect anything different from a party found guilty of collecting illegal tolls off alcohol sold through the NSLC in the 1970s?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, that is a complete misrepresentation of the facts, which we're getting used to from that party. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. Individuals donated personal checks to the Liberal Party. Those individuals made a decision to have the municipality reimburse them. It has been brought to my attention this morning that those individuals have taken responsibility and repaid the municipality of Richmond for those dollars that they shouldn't have been refunded of in the first place.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Speaker, I'm sure there's been lots of phone calls happening, especially yesterday, to trigger the councillors to do that. The member for Richmond said it was an honest mistake. If it's anything, this scandal and the way this government has been dealing with it has been short of, it's honesty. The money belongs to the taxpayers of Richmond County.
I'd like to remind the member to infer that any other member of the House is not honest, is unparliamentary. I'd like to ask you to rephrase the question or withdraw. The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I will retract the comment, and perhaps the government can take example when they see something that should be corrected. The money belongs essentially, Mr. Speaker, to the taxpayers of Richmond County, not to the re-election campaign for the member for Richmond. People have known for years that Liberal politics in Richmond have been run like a mafia. Why is this government defending
order, please? We'll move along to the next question. Referring to other members of this chamber as mafia is unparliamentary. We'll move on to the next question. The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Nova Scotia Teachers Union made the request. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Nova Scotia Teachers Union made the request to the Minister of Labour that she appoints a conciliation board. A conciliation board would bring both sides together and eventually report on whether an agreement might be struck. Its recommendations, Mr. Speaker, are not binding and seems like a logical place to go. It could avert a strike, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Labour told reporters that she hadn't spoken to the Minister of Education about the request. So I'd like to ask the Minister, has she had time now to talk to the Minister of Education on the request from the Nova Scotia Teachers Union about the conciliation board, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to inform the honourable member that is not how the process works, Mr. Speaker. No, I was asked if I had spoken to her, and I do not speak to the minister. The minister will respond. I do not ask her what she is going to do. So just so everyone understands what the process is, the conciliator filed his report, and both parties have 2 weeks in which to request a conciliation board. During that 2 weeks, they would each name who they would put on the board, Mr. Speaker. From there, those two members would agree upon a chair. If they cannot agree upon a chair, within 5 days, I will report.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Labour also said it's not up to her to decide there's a conciliation board or not. The union has requested one, and she had indicated that, and now the government has to respond. Mr. Speaker, the last time I checked, the Minister of Labour was part of the Executive Council, was part of government, and under her department, Mr. Speaker, under Labour Services branch, there is the ability for conciliation and labour tribunals. So what we're trying to do, Mr. Speaker, is ensure that the government does the right thing and averts a strike, Mr. Speaker. I'm hearing from parents across the province that want the government to act. So all I'm asking is, did the minister advise Executive Council that her department could help facilitate a conciliation board in order to hopefully avert a strike?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member does not understand how the Minister of Labour interacts with the rest of government. Clearly, I understand that their Minister of Labour sat there and interfered in negotiations. Mr. Speaker, I am neutral, Mr. Speaker. I am neutral in this process, Mr. Speaker. I am Switzerland. That's right. And I do not, Mr. Speaker, sit in cabinet.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Labour has the floor. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Labour.
I do not sit in cabinet when labour issues are discussed. I remove myself, Mr. Speaker, and there's a reason for that.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister responsible for Part 1 of the Gaming Control Act. The proponent of a proposed billiards lounge at 211 Main Street in Dartmouth says he now has verbal approval to transfer VLTs from the previous long-closed club to his new venture. As the Minister would no doubt be aware, the government has a policy of attrition of VLTs, and transfers are usually only permitted when the same business moves and reopens a short distance away and in a short time frame. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister commit to the House that he will not allow the VLTs to be located at the project at 211 Main Street?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Gaming Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll certainly look into this matter.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the Minister looking into it. I thought he might be aware because we already made an inquiry to his office about the same. The new venture will have a different type of liquor license if it's approved. It will no longer be a club but will be open to the general public, and it be proposed to open long after the previous bar owned by the same individual has closed. Mr. Speaker, it's impossible to see how this project would even qualify under the guidelines for transferring of VLTs. So, Mr. Speaker, at a public meeting held recently, residents were unanimously opposed to VLTs on this site. when will and instead of asking will the minister commit to not having that since he wants to look into it, when will the minister get back to the House about the issue of the BLTs?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Gaming Commission.
Now, Mr. Speaker, with all of my responsibilities, I'm sure we'll add this to the list of items to be looked at, and we'll deal with it accordingly.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Question for the Minister of Municipal Affairs. People in Richmond are upset. It was their action, Mr. Speaker, that caused the Ombudsman to start to investigate this matter and force the government to take action. They have been trying for almost a year to get this government to take action, and all that they were offered in return was delays. Where was the minister months ago when this matter was brought to his attention?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As soon as there was red flags that came in the annual auditing report that all municipalities need to go through, our staff became engaged. We had conversations with the municipality. We offered to bring in a financial expense expert and a mediator to help council fill the gaps in their financial policies. We made a recommendation to move forward with a forensic audit, and they took it upon themselves to do that. Mr. Speaker. And now we are looking at the law that governs the entire province, Mr. Speaker. We want all of our municipalities to be open and transparent and have a standardized level of transparency and accountability that people can be proud of and have faith in, Mr. Speaker. That's why we've initiated this review process. We're going to look at best practices across the province and deal directly with UNSM and our municipal partners to have their expenses put online, because that is our wish.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Speaker, I don't know. The answers keep changing back and forth as to whether they took responsibility to drive the course of the audit or not. I think that's obvious. We're hearing it back and forth depending on the minister's answer today. If I could distill this down into one question, Mr. Speaker, I would ask, why has this government been working with those involved in the Richmond spending scandal to avoid dealing with the matter and financially benefiting from it in the case of the Richmond Liberal Association?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, that is a complete misrepresentation of the facts here. Individuals gave personal checks to the Liberal Party. Those individuals then made a decision to reimburse themselves with taxpayers' dollars of Richmond County. That was wrong to do, Mr. Speaker, and it is against the Elections Act to do that. That's why Elections Nova Scotia is investigating that right now. Mr. Speaker, and those individuals have since repaid, which I'm happy they've taken responsibility for that, but Elections Nova Scotia is still investigating. We do not control Elections Nova Scotia. I know the member wants us to have dictatorial powers when it's convenient for him to guide the Ombuds Office, the RCMP, and Elections Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, but we don't do those things. The proper authorities are investigating this matter, and if that member has any evidence, he should provide it to them. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, I believe we can fairly be certain that this province is in crisis when it comes for help for drug addicts. Drug addiction. The system seems to be broken. The system has serious gaps. We have had a number of constituents visiting our office in Pictou Centre. Most recently, a grandfather visited our office, worried sick over his two grandsons. It was a very emotional meeting because the grandsons were constantly using needles, and he's afraid they're going to die before something is done for them. My question for the minister is, what would you suggest I say to this grandfather to comfort him while he's literally breaking down in front of me as he tells his story?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his thoughtful question and issue that he's raising on the floor of the legislature this morning. We know that this has been a significant issue in the province and across the country for the past decade. We know that in all parts of the province we have both professionals and also other people who intervene to work with our youth, whether it's in the school setting, community organizations, and of course, in this case here, I would say that visiting with a professional to get the best interventions seem to have the best results.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is very difficult to tell family members that there is nothing that you can actually offer in our area to any individual that's in this state. The grandsons are willing to take part in whatever program treatment that may be available according to their grandfather. Even the Department of Community Services in our area were unable to help. My understanding is they've been on a wait list for more than a year. Meanwhile, the grandfather continues to provide money for their habit because he feels that if he doesn't, problems with the law would definitely occur. The grandfather also stated that he doesn't know how he can possibly continue to afford this. My question to the Minister, keeping in mind this is one of many stories, does the Minister now agree the health system is indeed in a crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I certainly am well aware across the province of the depth of the opioid issue and the interventions that are required. Some of the most difficult, in fact, are with our youth, but there are, in fact, detox opportunities available throughout our province, and that certainly is the first stage of working with anybody who has an addiction. And certainly I would encourage the member to work with the grandfather to continue to get them into detox.
The Honourable Member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment. On Wednesday, I asked the Minister twice if she could confirm whether or not the Climate Change Division had been eliminated in her department. However, she failed both times to answer the question. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that the third time is a charm. So I'd like to ask the Minister if she can confirm whether or not the Climate Change Division has been eliminated in her department.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for the question and the opportunity once again to showcase where Nova Scotia is going and with climate change. We are still recognized as nationally as provincial leader in GHG reductions, and I think that's something all Nova Scotians can be very proud of. To actually answer the member's question, yes, we certainly do have a very active climate change division that's working on this file full-time.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday I also asked the Minister about the Climate Change Adaptation Fund program, but again I did not receive a straight answer. So, Mr. Speaker, this program is very important to help municipalities prepare for climate change. So I will ask the Minister again, what work has been done through this program in the last 2 years, and will she table that work with the House?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for the question. You know, climate change is such a big thing for Nova Scotia. We know that it's coming. We know that we have to prepare for that, and part of that is coastal adaptation. That's certainly part of the conversation that we're having. We're having that within our departments and across government because it's going to affect all of us. The conversations will continue, and the work will as well. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Mr. Speaker, when I was growing up, I was told to say what you mean and mean what you say. On June the 10th, the members of this government attended a hastily organized press conference about a collaborative health practice for Sydney. And this was only a cheap political trick to try to downplay a public meeting June 12th that was held to voice concern.
To remind the honourable member that cheap political trick is unparliamentary, and ask him to retract that phrase and rephrase his question. The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll retract that. And there was a meeting held in Sydney to try to downplay the public meeting June 12th that was held for people to voice concerns about a lack of doctors. Over 900 attended. A doctor actually called for a public inquiry. This is a community in crisis, Mr. Speaker. We still have doctors leaving, and now we learn that this collaborative care practice that was made such fanfare about is actually being put off again. It's not going to happen this fall as promised. Mr. Speaker, people need doctors today. I do have a question. I'm out of time. The people of Cape Breton are out of time. They are out of time waiting for
Order,
you
please.
to act on a
I'd like to ask the honourable member to order, please. Order, please. I'd like to ask the honourable member to direct his question through the chair.
Again, I apologize to you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health. When will this government finally admit there is a doctor crisis and stop making promises they don't want or won't keep?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the member does have enough information to know that there will be a collaborative practice developed in Sydney. What the member should know is that getting doctors to go to certain communities is extremely challenging. We've even had to provide two doctors. That we've even had to provide. Mr. Speaker, I didn't interrupt a member, I don't think, during his presentation. So I would appreciate the opportunity to explain to the member that Sydney will indeed be getting a collaborative practice. 13 doctors have started in Sydney. I think it's Dr. Melanie Adams who just opened a practice in Glace Bay. And the work continues to recruit, and that member will be able to tell residents of Sydney that when the new collaborative practice is opening in its fullest.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've learned one thing today. The motto of this government is, don't do today what you can put off until tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, 30 doctors have gone from Cape Breton, more are planning to leave. The minister took great pride in saying that this collaborative prayer practice was coming to Sydney this fall. He also took great pride last week in mentioning there was a doctor came to the north side and took on 1,000 patients. He failed to mention, of course, there was another doctor that left that had over 2,000 patients. Mr. Speaker, this minister, I know, is an honourable man. But my question is, when will he and his Liberal government do the right thing? Admit that there is a doctor's crisis in Cape Breton and do what they need to do so these Nova Scotians don't have to wait to find a doctor and finally put their words into action.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased that we have announced and recruitment is well underway with 22 nurses, nurse practitioners, family practice nurses that will be added to current practices. And as the member opposite knows, primary care is well beyond one or an individual doctor. Many patients now in Nova Scotia, when it's appropriate to see a nurse practitioner or a family practice nurse, are doing so. And what I can tell the member opposite in speaking to Dr. Harrigan last evening, that recruitment is happening every week. In fact, every day contact is made across the country with medical schools, and I think we'll see the fruition of some of that work, and Sydney will get their collaborative practice.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. As the Minister knows, the citizens of the Annapolis Valley have long awaited now the dialysis for the Valley Regional Hospital, have raised for it. My question for the Minister is, can the Minister update this House on plans for dialysis for Valley Regional Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the Valley held a wonderful event last evening put on by the Kidney Foundation. And we certainly, in talking with a number of people there that go to dialysis, yes, they are anticipating when they'll be able to go to Kentville. Perhaps some already get dialysis in Berwick, but some have to come to the city. That work is well in advance now. We've had a team working on the design because they're attaching it, of course, to the existing Valley Regional Hospital, and I'll keep the member for King South directly informed on what's happening with dialysis.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister for that answer. I will remind the Minister I represent Kings North. Mr. Speaker, in 2013 there was a press release announcing dialysis for Kentville. And I'll table that. In the 2016-17 capital plan, it states buildings other dialysis unit Kentville. There's only 5 months left in this year's capital plan. My question for the Minister is, what is going on with this? We have information on paper, but nothing in reality. Will the Minister explain why he has stated things on paper, but nothing has happened?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question this morning. What I meant to say was that I would inform the member for Kings South first, and then the member for Kings North, so that we're all in the loop. And I hope when we make that announcement, and he'll be part of it, when the dialysis unit will get underway, I hope that he won't be as negative about the dialysis as he was about the hospice, because I did hear from some of his constituents that in fact he should have been much more positive that the announcement was made, because going back to the Rodney MacDonald government and the Ham government, they both rejected hospice for the Valley.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister...
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Community Services
Order, please. The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Community Services announced changes to the Career Seek program. Prior to 2000, the Family Benefits program allowed students to access income assistance while in school. At the time the regulations were changed, there were 1,600 students receiving income assistance. Between 2013 and 2016, only 7 students accessed the Career Seek program. There have been questions about whether eligibility is too strict or if the caseworkers are not promoting the program to their clients, and I will table that. Mr. Speaker, what will the Minister do to increase uptake and participation in the program?
The Honourable Minister of Health. Or pardon me, Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question. The member opposite is absolutely right. We have not been promoting that. I don't know what the lack of communication within over the years, over the last 2 decades, has been within the department. So I was so extraordinarily pleased yesterday to make those enhancements, where we're actually now a provincial leader in encouraging people who are on income assistance to attend post-secondary education. I mean, that was my experience in the 90s before these two programs came into fruition. So to provide enhancements to make sure that people are supported and that barriers are removed are what any member of this House would want for people who are facing challenges to post-secondary education in this province.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, in making changes to Career Seek, the Minister acknowledged the cost of transportation can be a barrier to those wishing to attend post-secondary education. The cost of transportation is also a barrier for individuals who want to work, access medical services, or otherwise engage in the community. So, Mr. Speaker, given that the Minister knows this is an issue, will she agree to reinstate bus passes for ESIA clients?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd be pleased to tell the member opposite that over 87% of people who live in the central region of Nova Scotia do get access to, whether it's bus tickets, bus passes, or taxis, or whatever they need to get them where they are. If someone does not follow the criteria that is needed to go to a volunteer opportunity, upgrading or training, or work, they would not be provided with that, and that's been a long-standing practice within the department for many, many years, and thus one more reason why we're transforming the Department of Community Services in the province of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Health. Healthcare services have been eroding in Pictou County. We know there are a significant number of people without access to a primary healthcare physician. In the spring, I had an opportunity to meet the recruiter for Pictou County, who indicated they were working hard to recruit 2 doctors, one to replace Dr. Ibrahim's practice and one for the Pictou Clinic. Can the Minister please provide an update on the progress being made to recruit these 2 doctors for Pictou County?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I can convey to the member opposite is that NSHA continues to work on finalizing contracts for a number of doctors, but obviously it's important that they come into context of a wider team practice, and that takes, as the member can appreciate, if we look at the history in communities where practices are established, it takes some time to put that team together, and that's certainly in progress.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to the lack of doctors in Pictou County, thousands of people are dependent on the walk-in clinic in New Glasgow. However, the clinic is operating on part-time hours. It's open Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 4:30 to 8:45 and Saturday from 8:30 to 12:30, but closed completely during the remaining days of the week. Given the limited hours of operation but the colossal need of constituents who are reliant on the clinic to be open, will the Minister please extend the operating hours to meet the community needs until at least Pictou County receives 2 more doctors?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and that's a good question that the member is asking on behalf of her constituents, and it's one that obviously needs to be handled through the operations of the Nova Scotia Health Authority, and if they are not tuned into that question today, I will certainly make them aware of it.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is also to the Minister of Health. On June 10th, as already stated today before a committee meeting on doctors and healthcare in Cape Breton, this government announced that there would be a collaborative medical practice set up in Sydney. This week, we hear that this will be delayed until the new year and that they may do 2 instead of 1. Mr. Speaker, they can't even get 1 up and running in the promised time, and now they're going to make it 2. So my question to the minister is, can the minister please tell the people of Cape Breton who need a doctor now when this will happen and where these clinics will be set up at?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and in fact, in speaking with Dr. Harrigan as late as yesterday, we know that recruitment, in fact, is at a very, very good stage, because finally we're doing the right thing. We're doing the right thing by having recruitment in the very early months of the last year that residents are in their training, and I don't see any reason why that we will see those clinics that the NSHA is now in development. We don't have an exact date as to when they'll start, but they will come to fruition, I'm sure, and the member will see for himself.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in a previous question and answer, the minister said that they have a hard time getting doctors to go to certain communities. Now, Mr. Speaker, a doctor on the north side wanted to have a nurse practitioner or a family practice nurse to enhance that practice and the health care of the people on the north side. Can the minister tell us why this collaborative type practice was denied, and when will we see health care improve for Northside and Cape Breton in general? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
What I can tell the member opposite, Mr. Speaker, and the residents of Northside is that we're pleased to have recruited a doctor who started practice just a short time ago, and we'll continue to recruit for that area.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for emergency management. Yesterday, provincial park facilities closed for winter maintenance, and these closures are concerning for residents in southwest Nova Scotia whose household wells have been dry for months. Many continue to rely on public facilities. Last week, the member from Chester St. Margaret's asked the minister if there was a plan to keep showering facilities open through the winter months, but no plan was offered. Yet on Tuesday, the government announced it would allow residents to shower at 2 high schools and a county lifestyle centre. So my question for the minister is there a plan that the minister has not yet shared with the House?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So I appreciate the member pointing out that alternative locations have been found for members of those communities to shower and refill their water stations, because unfortunately the cold weather does force us to close our parks down for winter maintenance. We do have options to bring in mobile units as well if the current facilities are not meeting the demand, and we also have thought this out. If this problem does continue, we do have tanks who are able to get to residents so they can hold water in their homes, and we will be announcing a program hopefully next week that relates to this as well, that will help those individuals dealing with the situation, and particularly with the dug wells.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear that there is a plan underway, and we'll be anxious to hear the details. It is very disconcerting given that it's almost November and Cindy Day keeps hinting that snow is on the way. The ground will surely freeze soon, and we need details now. My question for the minister is, how is EMO working with the missing climate change adaptation staff to adjust to what may be a new normal in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That is a very, very important question. EMO, the staff at EMO, keep in constant contact with Environment Canada and their climate group. We are now going to ensure that municipalities have planning for water shortages. This was a first in Nova Scotian history, and we do want to be prepared in the event that it does happen again. We are changing our planning processes to also be ready for these situations in the future, just in case, Mr. Speaker. And we also have a great opportunity with the Liberal government in Canada, along with investments from the province, to have some major capital infrastructure investments in clean water initiatives across this province, Mr. Speaker, and we will work in direct liaison with our municipalities to achieve that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Colchester-Musqueam Valley.
Well, something tells me, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to get this in.
Where were you earlier, though? That's what I want to know. Order, please. Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired, and all kinds of things going on here. I just want to take a quick second to remind all members of the House that the use of electronic devices during question period is strictly prohibited. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of the question period, the Leader of the Conservative Party asked a question about how we responded to the teachers' union. I have that letter, Mr. Speaker. I have received information that they have received it. So if, with the consent of the House, reverting back, I'd like to table that letter.
Is it agreed? It is agreed. We'll revert back to tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The letter is tabled. The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of privilege, I heard the member from Richmond threaten me during question period by hollering, and it's almost amusing to me as well, Mr. Speaker. You say that out here, out there.